Book 60 of 2020 was A Social Contract by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So this was in Waterstones on a little stand of little books, and on the front it says, "Man was born free and he is everywhere in chains." And so I was like, yes, I want to read that. I had heard of Rousseau before, and I had heard of The Social Contract before, and I'm really glad that I read this book, because I am always very critical of society and always very critical of having to be, just realised that you can't really see my face, never mind, always really critical of kind of society and having to be part of it and being constrained by it. And, you know, I always love kind of like dystopias that are about totalitarian regimes, because I hate the thought of that and being constrained by, you know, I hate the fact that a lot of my wage is taken away because of taxes. And yeah, I'm very critical of society. But this starts off by arguing that without civil society, what we would have instead is the kind of right of the strongest. So you would be continuously, you know, if you were the strongest and you'd obtain some kind of resource, you'd be continually in defence of that kind of property, and you would always be like worried about whether you were going to be usurped, whether somebody was going to kind of like, you know, take over you. And if you were the weakest, well, then you'd have to do without, because you weren't strong enough to obtain what you kind of needed. So, you know, when I think of that, I think I am not physically strong in comparison to a lot of other people. So if that was a situation, that would be a disadvantage for me. And so therefore, what Rousseau suggests is that we have this social pact that allows us civil liberties. So, for example, things like the right to property, the right to own property, and to be able to defend that property through law and have protection through law, is given to us as long as we make the social pact and the social contract to obey laws and, you know, government and things like that's legislative power. And because of this, there's a suggestion that society is equal, because we all have this right and we all have these civil liberties, we all have this protection. But Rousseau does suggest that under bad government, that this can actually be an illusion that masks inequalities in society. And it was interesting to comment that, because that is essentially what society is in Britain at the minute. Like, there's so much inequality, and it is because of bad government that keeps getting voted in. Rousseau talks about the structures of different kind of society, suggests that the general will of the citizens and the law should benefit all. And this is why I'm suggesting that there's inequalities in our current, you know, kind of situation, because the laws don't benefit everybody. They benefit particular people. Rousseau comments that a lot of the kind of will and laws are manipulated by the wealthy. They don't tolerate equality because they aim for private profit. So their aim is not to have equality for all, because they want more of it for themselves. Rousseau critiques the different styles of government as well. So he talks about kind of aristocracy, monarchy, democracy, dictatorship. He also kind of comments that you need to keep legislative power separate from the sovereign. So there needs to be kind of a dichotomy between who's making the laws and who is ruling, because otherwise that, you know, is open to corruption and manipulation. And it then won't be an equal society, because it won't follow the general will, and it won't, you know, have laws that benefit all. Rousseau also talks about kind of good signs of government, and also, what was more worrying, talks about the opposing sign of, you know, not good government, which is that you kind of have a destruction of the general will, and it leads to sectionalisation, which is what we're seeing currently. You know, in response to bad government, you have sectionality and people warring against each other because that's what they want, because then you won't vote in your best interests, and they'll stay in power. It drew really, really stark parallels with what's going on currently in the political climate, and it's basically a timeless discussion of politics. I preferred the beginning part of it. I was very enthralled when I first started reading it. I think as you kind of go through it, it becomes more and more dense, and it is an old text, so it's obviously going to be a little bit impenetrable in parts. So I had to read it like a couple of times to get my head around it. Particularly the areas where it's talking about like legislative power and the sovereign and the different way that laws are kind of sectioned out. I mean, I think if you've got a background in law, you'll probably be able to get that a little bit easier than what I did first time. But yeah, I would recommend to read it because it gives another kind of perspective on society, and you kind of view your restrictions in a little bit more of a positive light, and you don't feel as oppressed by society as what you might have done, or at least that was my benefit from reading it. So yeah, I would probably recommend it for that reason.